All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to it's really the night of the State of the Union, but we need to keep it real tonight ahead of the State of the Union and talk about we ain't got it talking about high energy costs and how that is impacting young people. We're focusing on our young people, Gen Z in the house in Michigan, but we have some wonderful friends with us this evening to get into a much needed conversation. As we have seen, energy prices are skyrocketing, and particularly as Gen Z are, they're adults now. As a millennial, we are not the youngest in the bunch anymore. Things look completely different, especially from an economic perspective when I was in my 20s, right? And early 30s. But we now know that these high energy prices, along with the myriad of other things that are just astronomically high, are impacting not just your day to day activities, like with consumption, like with things that you buy, but also it's impacting your future economic plans. So, for example, it's becoming increasingly difficult to just find somewhere to live, let alone thinking about planning for buying a house. Just even renting is becoming a huge strain for Gen Z. And we got Gen Alpha that's up next, y'all. They in high school. So we really got to try to figure this thing out. Gen Z to save the world. But before we get into this conversation and we kick it off to our co-hosts, I do want to acknowledge our partner for this evening. So I didn't introduce myself. I'm LaTricea Adams with Young Gifted and Green. We are an environmental justice and civil rights organization. We focus on building the capacity of the next generation of environmental justice activists. And so it is extremely fitting that for tonight's conversation that we really center this around what's happening with our young people. I also want to acknowledge tonight's partner is the Climate Action Campaign. And so thank you so much to Kiara Rutherford. Kiara, did you want to provide any remarks before we get started?
Hi, folks. My name's Kiara Rutherford with the Climate Action Campaign. We are based in DC. We are a coalition of climate organizations who are advocating for strong and durable federal climate policy. We know we are at a moment where we are in the defense mode, and that's why we're here talking today because we ain't got it. The energy bills are too damn high. And so we're really excited to be a part of this conversation, bringing young people to the center where because the young people are the folks who are going to be bearing the brunt in the future. So we're really excited to get this conversation started. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. So yeah, millennials, we tried to, do our best, but I'm gonna keep it real from my generation. It wasn't a whole lot of us that were into, the climate space. We got some that were in the climate and environmental space, but we have to top our hats off to Gen Z that has been holding it down. Unfortunately, it's gonna be both of us together that has inherited, you know, a real ghetto planet right now. The earth is real ghetto right now, but then also all of these extremely high prices, particularly with energy, that's also contributing to CO2 emissions. So it's like we're spending money to poison our communities. But let's go ahead and introduce our co-host. I am going to allow each of the co-hosts to brag about yourself because this is a powerhouse of young people that we have here tonight. So let's start with Michigan in the house. Deanna Brown.
Hi everyone, my name is Deanna Brown. I work for Michigan League of Conservation Voters as the Federal Government Affairs Coordinator, and I also serve on the board of directors for Young Gifted and Green. I worked for Young Gifted and Green for about 5 years, loved every moment of it, and I'll always be a part of that tribe. I'm originally from Flint, Michigan, born and raised. So I'm a Michigander through and through, especially with all the environmental injustice that happened to my city when I was a teenager, and that really shaped who I am today and the work that I do. Um, just being from Flint and then going off to DC for school, graduating from Howard during the pandemic. It was tough, but I did it. And then, I came back home, got my master's from Wayne State. And I've been doing a lot of environmental and climate work and democracy work ever since. And yeah, I'm really glad to be here and to discuss our energy bills are being too damn high. I hate paying consumers every month, but I have to do it. I hate being an adult, but I have to do it. As I'm getting towards the late 20s now, which is crazy, but really, really excited for this space we have tonight and to discuss everything that's going on with the climate, energy, and then just affordability overall.
All right. Thank you, Deanna. And let's hear from another Michigander, Ernesto.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Ernesto. I am the president of Youth Climate Council at Grand Valley State University, as well as the NAACP. Why can't I think of it? Treasurer, assistant treasurer as well. I'm a junior at Grand Valley, set to graduate in 2027. I'm also the former Michigan League of Conservation Voters, um, youth and college campus organizer. Um, and I'm just excited to be here to talk about this with you guys. I got my start kind of back in 2020, right after the wildfires. So, haven't been as long in the game as some people, but come to think of it, it really has been like 6 years. Um, but we talked about getting houses and all that. So I'm gonna say this: I'm not even 21 yet. So y'all, this really about to affect my people. So please, let's make sure today's a good conversation.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, you got a little bit of time, but life comes at you quick. Not to sound morbid, but I'm really glad that you lifted up the wildfires because our other two co-hosts for tonight definitely can attest to that. Let's kick it off to Kristy.
Hi everyone. I'm super happy to be here, especially in such a crazy time. I'm Kristy Drutman. I am the founder and creator of my media platform, Browngirl Green, that's focused on empowering folks with actionable, entertaining content to teach them on how they can get active in the climate conversation. I got really active and passionate about this work when I was going to college at UC Berkeley and was studying environmental policy and just realized that I really needed to make my voice heard and decided to, build a media platform that was focused on getting my message out there because I didn't feel like the mainstream media was covering these issues in the communities that I cared about the most. And I'm also the co-CEO and founder of Green Jobs Board. We are a platform that's dedicated to getting more folks into climate career pathways by bridging the gap through resources, educational events, and storytelling as well. A lot of my work is all about how can we break down barriers and make sure that people, especially young people, are equipped with the tools that they need to navigate such treacherous times as right now. So, really grateful to be in this conversation with folks that are taking action and grateful to be, building platforms and tools to get folks mobilized as well.
Awesome. Last but certainly not least, Isaiah.
Hello, everyone. It's so great to meet you. My name is Isaiah Hernandez. I am an environmentalist, educator, and the creative behind the platform Queer Brown Vegan. I started digital media in 2019, but growing up in LA, I grew up low income, experienced a lot of environmental health issues. And so my journey today as someone who's chronically ill, I did environmental science when I was in undergrad and really learned a lot about the importance of climate science, but then eventually got into digital media to translate it. Today I'm working on my first debut book, Dear Environmentalist, which is set to release next April. That focuses a lot on some of the 21st century issues that we're dealing with now in environmental justice spaces, but also the rise of the border and surveillance industry and data centers. So really going into that. And I really believe that education is true wealth for people. So in order for us to kind of understand the energy landscape and crises that we're in today is like it's no longer about educating ourselves, but preparing ourselves of how to action orient ourselves to take actions against these industries. So I'm really excited for this discussion, and we'll be exploring a lot of questions here.
Awesome. So I told y'all we got all the experts in the house. Love that we have lived experiences. I always say that there is no greater expert than people who are directly impacted by an issue. There's no one that can speak to it like those individuals, and whether it be an engineer, a scientist, fancy PhDs, we don't care what letters you have at the end of your name. No one can speak to an issue like someone who has been directly impacted. And so, with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with what the overarching point of this conversation is with these high energy bills. So I think about, about 3 weeks ago. And I'm a Southerner. I am born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, right by the Mississippi River. It's below the Mason-Dixon. It's supposed to be hot. Typically, I grew up with true four seasons. However, the weather is getting out of control. So, in some instances in part of the country, you'll hear about extreme heat. So, of course, like in the Northwest, in the Pacific, for example, has experienced astronomically hot summers, but we're also seeing a major shift of extreme cold in the South, where it's a domino effect. We don't have the infrastructure here to sustain that type of weather, but even more than that, our electricity bills, our utility bills are extremely high. So maybe about 3 weeks ago, we were in some mutant snow. I don't know what kind of snow this was and ice. It refused to melt. There are literally people that are reporting that they have a one-bedroom apartment and their electricity bill was almost $700 for 1 month in a one bedroom. Like who got time for that, right? So what we want to hear from, what are your experiences, your real life experiences with these very much so rapidly increasing utility rates? Let's actually start with Deanna.
Yeah, so for me, this past summer, my consumer's energy bill was over $300 for every month. Um, it was my apartment complex said something was wrong with my AC. My AC wasn't working at one point. And like I said, $300 for a two-bedroom apartment in Flint, Michigan. That's ridiculous. I can't even tell you the square feet of my apartment, but it's not that big and it shouldn't cost $300 every month for me to have basic necessity of air when it was a heat wave every other week. It's above 90. In Michigan, we're not supposed to get that hot. We're not the South, we're the Midwest. We're supposed to be, the cool 80s, sometimes 90s. But when the heat index reached over 100 and I didn't have air, that was an issue. And a lot of people don't have those extra funds to pay that $300 for their bill. But I did everything the right way, went to school, and I got a good job. But I feel for the people who couldn't do that, didn't have the opportunities that I had to be able to go to school and get a good job. What about the people who have to choose between putting food on the table and paying their energy bill? People who have to choose between daycare and paying their bill. It shouldn't have to be we're deciding between two things. We should be able to make enough money to pay for everything. But ever since that orange thing got in office again, it's our bills have been going up. We have not been able to catch a break. Food prices are ridiculous. People aren't deciding, do I fill my fridge or do I pay my consumer's bill? And it should not be like that. And I already have beef with consumers energy from when I lived with my mother, and a tree that was not in our yard fell on our garage and knocked out the power line from our house. And we had to pay to get the tree removed, over $1,000 to get that tree removed, then pay an electrician to put the line back on the house. And my mother literally just went grocery shopping, filled the deep freezer and the regular freezer, and all the food spoiled. And consumers did not give us anything to replace the food. We had to literally pay out of pocket because it didn't make sense for my mom to use the deductible because it would have made her insurance go even higher for us to get our power line back on so we can have power in the house. And that happened in 2022, I believe. So I already have beef with consumers energy. And DTE, same with DTE, got beef with them too. We should not be paying this much money for our utility bills for the worst service in the Midwest. The worst service. Unreliable. It's power outages every other day. It should not be like this. And we're paying over $300 for this crazy work.
Yeah, that's a whole lot of, and again, like what I mentioned earlier, like it's a domino effect. So when you think about the intersection of these already ridiculous utility bills and climate change, it literally exacerbates everything, right? So let's hear from Michigan. Let's stay in the Midwest right quick. Ernesto, what's been your experience? I know you are still in college. But as you mentioned earlier, unfortunately, this real world that's real messy right now, is swiftly approaching. So I'd love to hear your perspective as it relates to these ridiculously high utility bills. And I forgot, maybe, Ernesto, you still having a little bit of problems with your audio, maybe. Okay, we'll come back to Ernesto. Let's hear from Kristy.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, I think like in general, the feedback that I've been hearing from so many people right now is that they just don't even know how to get by day to day. And a lot of people lost their jobs, especially with so many federal rollbacks, especially people working on climate, and people even in these spaces, right? And I think like there is this interesting discussion on wanting to have like an America first approach or trying to like push that, we need to be leaders as a country. But yet at the same time, we're seeing, you know, unemployment rates through the roof, inflation up the roof, and yet there's not really a clear roadmap that leads us out of this mess. It just seems like it's going to continue to get worse until, we have leaders in power and people that we do elect into positions of power that are going to pass like the policy and the bills necessary to, regulate polluting industries to get us back on track for a just transition, thinking about, transitioning economies. And I think at the end of the day, like even if this current administration is going to restrict, the growth and the prevalence of like renewable energy, we are still seeing that many states, even Texas and other states, are like still pushing forward, high levels of renewable energy, despite them being like a red state. And so I think like there is this paradox right now where people are feeling this like pressure of like, we can't afford our energy bills, but then like we're still stuck dependent on fossil fuels. And then especially with like, I'm sure we're going to get into this, the emergence of like AI data centers and all these other energy expenditures, we're seeing huge energy inequities, right? Like on the one hand, people can't even afford their energy bills and their lights are going out. And on the other end, all the money that is going into energy is going mostly into fossil fuels to power AI data centers, which are also like currently very destructive to the planet and to Black and Brown communities. And so we're seeing like us on like the biggest spectrum of like energy and equity, I think this country and this world personally is like probably ever seen. And we're on the beginning steps of it, even though we obviously have a history of, fossil fuel extraction. But I think not moving towards, that pathway of a just transition that we were starting to get on with, the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act and all these things, having all of this stuff repealed now, having those jobs and that infrastructure and these departments repealed is leading us back into this place where now communities are going to have to like fend for themselves to try to push on a local level. How can they get clean energy contracts? How can they get that infrastructure incentivized to be built? How can we get local politicians to create those incentives to push forward when the federal government is not, right? More to be said. I get so worked up about all this stuff. It makes me so mad. But I think at the end of the day, it's important that we name that these patterns of inequality have been here. And this administration is just, digging the dagger even deeper and making it even worse for communities to dig themselves out.
Yeah, and I love the fact that, well, I don't love it, but I like that you brought up with the mass unemployment that we are experiencing. When I think about Gen Z in particular, a lot of young people like went right into college at the very beginning of the Biden-Harris administration, and there was this big push around green jobs, right? So the promise of all of these different career paths, and it all just literally overnight just seemed to vanish. It makes me think about when I was growing up, it was this big push about like you have to go to college. If you don't go to college, like you're not going to succeed, right? But now millennials are inundated with student loan debt. It's just like from generation to generation, there's these false promises. But once we get here, not only, are young people facing, you know, um, just fear of not being able to have a stable career, it's also like, are we going to even have a planet to work in? Like, it's very morbid, very morbid. I also like, Kristy, that you raised that, it's not over, as far as still incentivizing clean, renewable energy, really working at the state and local level, bringing it back. And I hope that we can hear from Ernesto. I know in the state of Michigan, even though we know Big Gretch, she's winding down her term, but even with some of the rollbacks, with the focus on clean energy, with the focus on clean jobs, Michigan has still stood on environmental justice business. They have not shied away from even using the terminology. They're still moving forward with their Justice 40 plans that they started now almost 5 years ago. But just want to hear another perspective from Michigan. Ernesto?
Yeah, I hop in. I'll say this. Big Gretch and her team, and not even just her team, but the state of Michigan as a whole, they will fight back against anything that has been going on, whether it's been the DEI rollbacks, they fought back against that. For example, I pull up Grand Valley, not, and that's not a conversation that we're supposed, that we're having. We're talking about energy, but I'll bring it in real quick because they're very much correlated. Grand Valley, they refused to roll back anything. They said they was not rolling back anything until federally they came and said you have to roll it back. They said until they tell us that, nothing. Same thing with anything environmentally they've been doing. They've been sure to keep that going, and Michigan as a whole has. I mean, we look at Michigan, it's on the forefront. It was what 2023, 2024. Passed one of the biggest green energy bills in the history of the United States, not just, our state. So I feel as though Michigan has been on the right track for a little while. And then hopefully with this election going on and everything, hopefully we'll get someone in there that wants to keep going on that right track and continue to keep pushing forward.
Yeah, thank you for that. There is still power with states and, with local government. I think that it is really critical as we are in the midterms. I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna keep it 501c3 friendly. But it's really important to think about these issues that are very much so intersectional, right? When you go into ballot booths, this literally just like it was, in 2024, just like it was in 2020, we are literally voting for our lives. And it's not just the outcome of a presidential election. It's not even just, the outcome of a congressional election. Your governor, your state legislators, your city council, your local mayor, all of those individuals play a really critical role in the things that happen in your everyday life. Let's go back to the West Coast and get another perspective. Right. Sorry, is that
Yes. I think collectively what we're seeing right now that there's simultaneous things happening, right? You have the increases like all the speakers had mentioned, but we kind of look back a few years ago, Project 2025 did outline this idea of, right, how do we not fully dismantle the EPA, but how do we weaken these systems in order to allow the acceleration of corporate industries to increase? So I think that there's this very strategic thing that we are often missing in democratic spaces of how right-wing spaces are organizing and Republican spaces are organizing in order to kind of create these crises, because we know, one, with the endangerment finding, right, that just was rescinded, doesn't mean that the science isn't there, that it can't be presented. It just means that it can no longer, it doesn't have a legal mechanism behind it. And so the issue that we're seeing today is that when we're giving more power and these groups are pushing for more coal industries and natural gas industries to increase, is that it's using that as a way to, one, to make sure that these renewable energy industries are not quote unquote profitable, even though they are, and they are profitable for communities. And so we're seeing this consolidation of corporate power going into these energy industries. And two, I think that what we're seeing against is that the government itself is trying to really team up against the people to misconstrue this message of like it's solar panels that are destroying your natural areas, it's these wind turbines, but instead it's actually like we're going to continue to expanding these types of industries that are going to provide you. And we know for in fact that with the energy crises in the West Coast, Midwest, and East Coast, there's been a lot of battles right now with data centers that they're trying to shut them down. And I think that one of the things that must be understood is that we still don't know the amount of load center off energy input that these data centers are putting off. And also, any industry can lie and say that we're running on 100% renewable energies, which is a certification or credit sometimes. So I could say and be like, I'm in LA, I run a data center. It runs on 100% renewable energy certificates, which is coming from a different state that is not really on the same grid. So it's, again, there's a lot of like, I think things that we have to recognize is that when we're seeing the weakening of our democracy happening, what are ways that we as residents can make sure to not just resist from an activist standpoint, but also have concrete plans. And I think one of those things is making sure that there's obviously the strong benefits for solar and like renewable energies, but that there's also required conditioning for community benefits to be a part of those, and to ensure that they're not using the community's energy sources versus these industries that are probably going to be hooked onto the power lines of these already existing communities that are already facing energy poverty. That is one of the things that I think we're going to have to be having to navigate under.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I saw this in the Q&A box. Thank you for uplifting, this horrific rollback of the endangerment finding. And one of the things, even when we talk about Michigan, when we talk about California, where, some of the most progressive policies in the country, there's still a point of reckoning as it relates to data centers, right? So, on one hand, yes, we understand that, AI is almost integrated in everything that we do, even if we don't even know it, right? Like we have to actively turn off functions to make sure that AI is not even being forced upon us. But at the same time, it's this whole narrative that is informed by tech bros that it's going to be so much money. Is it? Is it? And then, like, even if it is so much money, is it really worth like the pollution that is going into majority Black and brown communities? And then on top of that, It's not regulated. It's not regulated. It's very unclear, like where onus lies. So at no point in time should a ratepayer be responsible for the upkeep, the build out of a data center. Like life could go on without these things. Like the last time I checked, the human brain, was doing its thing, without having this hyper dependency on AI. So, even though there are opportunities for states, for local cities and counties to actually resist, we're seeing in some of the most progressive places, there's still this desire to steamroll data centers, right? And it's not lost on us that these data centers are energy guzzlers. And then, even when you think about, and I'm glad that you mentioned this around some of the clean renewable aspects of it, you have to really be careful. So, for example, with battery packs, how are they charged? Aren't they still charged and use fossil fuels, right? Fossil fuel power energy to charge them. And then even thinking about, I fangirl about solar all the time, but we also have to think about ethical disposal of solar, right? We have to think about the ethical, the global ethics around the manufacturing of solar. So it's all very much so multifaceted, and definitely needs to be priority when we think about what is the future going to be, both with technology, but also with the amount of energy that we're using, and how can we really be thoughtful about conservation. Like we were on a roll with conservation, right? Like even in the 90s there was this push around conservation, and now with the current administration it's like we're going way way back in time. So thank you for sharing those perspectives. So let's talk about what it looks like day to day. I know, Kristy, one of the ways in which I connected with you on social media that I thought was so dope is about like how you incorporate so many aspects of conservation in your everyday life. Being a person of color, we were doing our thing already. Like our parents, our grandparents, they were already doing these things before, these fancy terms had really been coined. But I'll be real with you. Sometimes when you do want to conserve, when you do want to make better environmentally friendly decisions, they're expensive. They're really expensive. And as we talked about earlier, with the increase of energy, with the increase of food, with the increase of frequency with unaffordable housing, how are you managing to just, prioritize the essentials at this point?
Yeah, so basically, like, there's a lot in that. So basically, like, I would say the main thing is like figuring out where you can prioritize action, I think is like really important. I think is basically at the baseline of what I think you're asking. I mean, I realize that as a person that's like taking action and in these spaces, like you have to understand that it doesn't need to be like the biggest expert in the room. You don't need to be the biggest expert in the room to figure these things out. I think a lot of these problems now are very visible, or you're like actually living it by experiencing things like, having to pay a ridiculous utility bill and wondering, why am I the one paying for this? Shouldn't it be these big corporations? I think that's like where you start with the question, right? Like, why am I the one footing the bill when like these people have billions of dollars, and have the wherewithal and the R&D budgets or research and development budgets to fix this problem? Why is it being put on young people to have to solve these very systemic issues? Because at the end of the day, like, while it is great, like, making switches at home, like switching to more energy efficient light bulbs, doing these like switches that you can do, which obviously will save you money, because a lot of our communities have had to learn survival, and we're going to continue to figure that out, right? Even in situations like that, like what we're dealing with right now. like it shouldn't have to be this way, right? Like we've had generations of our ancestors before us who made so many sacrifices, and it's like, yeah, we shouldn't have to be fighting for the basics. Like it should just be, a given. And, I think it is really incredible seeing that there are states and communities that are fighting back. And I do want to just emphasize that. I think it's easy to fall into the doom and gloom on a lot of these issues and feeling like everything's hopeless. But, I want to shout out, my awesome folks out in New Jersey who were able to shut down, a recent AI data center and were able to push forward getting a park established in their community. And they did that because they identified that at the end of the day, they wanted to preserve natural spaces in their community. They wanted to have something that's going to last for generations, not something that is going to nickel and dime their community members. And I think similarly, we are seeing more community members putting pressure and saying, like, no, actually, um, our utilities should be doing things like protecting renters. And even with this volatility, like why are they not putting in the safeguards or the rail guards or whatever you want to call it, to protect people and communities from this volatility as it continues to happen with inflation. Like I think, we're now seeing policymakers that are pushing forward bills and legislation that are kind of creating some of those safeguards and saying, no, actually, like X utility, you actually need to not price out your constituency and people that are like actually in this area. Um, and I think, being able to tie that in the future to how people get assistance, even like we're also like, needing to talk about like social goods and social services. I think communities have every right to also apply for financial assistance and get support for things like when their energy bills are spiking, right? And so I think about things on like a broader sense that like I think you can only do so much in a day as an individual, but I think being able to push your, local decision makers and policymakers in your community to say, hey, like I can't afford to live here anymore because of my energy bill or like how I'm existing, and saying, hey, like, can you pass a bill? Can you push forward legislation, X legislator or policymaker that's like going to protect my rights as a renter or a homeowner from seeing, my energy prices jumping. Um, I think, whether that's joining a phone bank, whether that's getting a petition together and getting people to sign it, I think all of these things is like the ways in which you can protect your community in a meaningful, like long-term way. And yeah, I hope that that answered your question. I think it did, but I'm happy to like answer any follow-ups too.
That was actually perfect and a really good segue. The responsibility is definitely not on young people, but it's not on any of us. Like, we really have to hold these oligarchs, these billionaires, trillionaires at this point responsible. We can use as many recycled goods, we can, hit, um, net zero, we can do zero waste, we can do all of these things, but it still won't compare to the absolute critical necessity for corporations to stop one polluting and stop overproducing. I mean, using resources that are completely unnecessary, right? So I think that you're absolutely right that we really need to maintain, like, who's the monster in this story that we're in right now that needs to be slayed, right? It's not everyday people, it is the individuals that consistently prioritize profit over people. So I like that you mentioned that, it's not just doom and gloom. We're in an era of absolute resistance, right? Like resistance, that we have not seen, in our lifetime, but we know that our ancestors did. We know that there are ways to fight Goliath, right? And so thinking about that, kind of in the same vein in which Kristy was discussing, Deanna, since you work very much so in policy, how can young people be more involved in policy? We don't see a lot of young people often, as you all know, in policy spaces. So, yeah, how can we use that as a tool?
I would say get involved at the local level. Start there. So go to your city council meetings. Hopefully they're not as disorganized as my cities that go viral every other meeting. But start there and see what you can do there. Go to the school board meetings. See what's going on in the schools. Like I said, so just start local, and then you can, yes, RIP Eric Mays, but that's another topic for another day. Um, but see what you can do at the local level and work your way up. See if you actually want to run for office. I know I will probably never run for office. My mouth is a little too slick for people, and I know it's needed in politics, but I'm not gonna let them give me any more gray hair than I already have. So see if you're a good fit for that. Get some mentors in the game already. So state legislators, see if your your state senate or your state house have any internships, starting there, starting locally. Also just joining different organizations, being a volunteer. So if you're in Michigan, look up Michigan League of Conservation Voters. We have volunteer huddles all over the state, just so people can get involved. And it's a lot of younger people leading those volunteer huddles too in Michigan OCV. And also, like I said, having a good mentor. So a lot of people probably don't know, but LaTricea is my mentor, and she's been my mentor for years. I would not be in the space I am today without her. I wouldn't have any of the opportunities that I've had to sit in and be with policymakers and policy decision makers without her. So making sure you have a LaTricea in your life so she can guide you, so you're not as lost as she was when she first started off in the game. So I can be at the table now in a different organization, leading different initiatives that we have around the state and just around the country because I do federal work. Um, but yeah, so that's really it. You need start locally if you need to, and find a mentor that really loves the youth and wants to give back. I know I still mentor the kids that I did that I mentored and led when I worked for Young Gifted and Green. I still have a good relationship with them to this day. And just how LaTricea reached her hand back out to lead me forward, I do the same for them. So also being that crutch for youth in the state, people younger than you. I'm still considered youth, even though I'm about to be late 20s a couple months. But making sure, so you have an Ernesto, making sure, okay, he's not even 21 yet. Making sure you're guiding him, making sure he knows what's going on and how you can get involved. Like I said, you really need to start locally, see what's going on the ground in your city, so we can influence what's going on nationally.
Yes, mic drop for the Flintstone. Big up to Michigan. And that's a good segue. I want to hear from Ernesto. So we know that at the collegiate level is where a lot of movement action happens. So Ernesto, can you talk about what it looks like with organizing at the collegiate level? Like you said, you may not have fully entered into like real strong adulthood at this point, but it is swiftly approaching. So what is organizing around, resisting high energy costs, resisting this rapid expansion of AI, resisting the rollbacks of laws and rules that have existed for decades in some regards. What does that organizing look like at the collegiate level?
It's a lot of the same and a lot of differences. I'll start with this. A lot of the times, college kids don't want to hear the word policy. They don't want to hear it. They don't, or the word politics. They don't want to hear those words. They don't want to think about them words. They avoid them as much as possible. And that's coming from someone who thought about doing that when he first got into college. Like, a little bit. But what you got to do, and one thing that he's not in here, but Diana knows him. My mentor, Michael King, kind of helped me with was figuring out how to get these college kids interested in what we're doing, finding things that are interesting to them that still kind of teach them, oh, you could be doing this, you could be doing that, and making this difference, and without having to say those them turn off words then that they don't want to really spend the time on. Like one of the big things that we did here at GV was we hosted a fashion show that was completely reused clothing. Everything was thrifted, or if like even if we didn't thrift it, we did like an event beforehand where we did clothes that you didn't want no more, trading swap. Like we just tried to do things that students would really be like, oh, okay, I can go to this, and this isn't me participating in necessarily policy or politics, but I'm still making a difference. And on top of that, a lot of times once students kind of get into that first little bit of, oh, this is interesting to me, they'll hop onto more of those phone banks, they'll hop onto more of those other things. We had a lot of students that had hopped in right after that fashion show. You really just got to find a way to get students hooked, because if once they're hooked, they kind of keep coming back. You might lose a couple here that trickle off, but most of the time they kind of stay.
I like that, and it's really important, even I have to embrace the auntie that I'm transitioning to. It's really important for there to be youth led movement work. So not just youth inclusive, but allowing space for youth to lead. You know, I don't necessarily know exactly what resonates, with college age kids, and that's okay. It's my responsibility, in the older generation to, at minimum, provide resources, right? To provide insight, but like also being very respectful. Where again, I talked about like there's no greater expert than someone who is being directly impacted. The impact of the high energy costs, the impact of all of these rollbacks that we see with this current administration, how it impacts me is going to look different, between generation to generation, between state to state, between city to city, and county to county. But I can tell you one thing that is central right now. This whole country is pissed off about how high these damn light bills are. This is a really interesting point in history where it is crossing racial boundaries. It's really crossing like economic boundaries as well. So we talk about some of the residential rates that we see increase. Think about like small businesses. They're also being hit really hard, by these high prices with utilities. But the key thing is when we talk about diversity, it's really important to also think about the diversity with age groups. And sometimes I don't really know if, aunties and unks and above, if we are necessarily making sure that young people's voices are heard. Before we transition to this other part, I also want to uplift that I promise y'all, it is so critical for young people to be involved in rulemaking, to be involved in the legislative process beyond just voting. That's just one part of the democratic process. So I know with Young, Gifted, and Green, we have kids as young as the sixth grade that will actually make comments on rulemaking. And Ernesto, you're absolutely right. The approach that I would use with, an older student or older youth is not what I would use to approach, a sixth grader. So we have to really get creative in the ways in which we are engaging with young people to make sure that it is authentic inclusion and not performative. And y'all know what I mean when people are like, "Oh, yes, this is youth." Is it? Or did you just ask somebody at the last minute that was young to jump in? But I do want to get into some of these great questions that came through, and I want to actually pose this question to Isaiah's. This question is, and I think about like all of the great things that I learned from your content that I've been following for years. But, even though we know that we need to hold corporations absolutely responsible for their contributions to rising energy rates, to pollution, but just when we think about the things that we can kind of control, what are some things that you're still able to maintain like in everyday life? So the question here was what tech at home do you use in your life that is really, really important to you? Like, do you have a car that's the EV? Are you engaged in solar? Are you biking more? Are you living somewhere where they have good public transportation? Because I know they don't where I am. I know they don't where Deanna is either. But just curious to kind of learn like, what are some, in the middle of chaos with our administration, what are some things that still exist that you have access to?
Yeah, I mean, I think growing up, like, I like similar to other stories, like I grew up with no AC until like we started using it maybe when I was a late teenager. My mom forbid it because she was like the energy bill's gonna go up. I think like checking an inspection of your home, like sealing all holes that may be releasing any type of like cool air or like escaping if you have to cool it or heat it as one of those things. I'll be honest, I think that like, I just got a car recently, like a year and a half ago for like $1,500 on Facebook Marketplace, and it's gas, like it's not EV. And I think that's just reality. Like it's my first car. Like I didn't get my license until like my mid late 20s. But I do think that like in terms of like, asking yourself like what are some of the creative ways that you're generating energy? Is that like, I've seen people like some things I wish I could do like in the future is like one is like I'm already putting my money and investments in renewable industry. So like when it comes to investing, which is something I did not know of growing up as someone who's poor and had to learn through mentorship, is a lot of my money today is in within companies that are not exploiting the planet, which is a different conversation there. Number two is I think that like what I feel like I've done is like I have this like miniature solar panel that charges your phone. It's from this company called Group Hug Solar Tech. I don't know if they're no longer available, but like it's founded from a woman of color, and I charge my phone through it because I get a lot of sunlight here. So I actually do save a little bit of energy through that. It's not like a big revolutionary change on that. And then the other thing I would just say, like in terms of like if your state or area has it, is like there's this really great program that the Los Angeles Metro runs. It's called LA Metro Ride, where it's an app where you can order a van to pick you up at a local bus stop and it takes you to downtown LA. And I know that not all like areas have that in different states, but I thought that was really cool for like people who maybe like, don't want to take the bus and want to get dropped off from point A to another bus stop in downtown LA that's near their job. So I think that like even bringing back things like culture in our communities of ride shares, like let's not rely on Uber and Lyft as much because those cost money and they exploit workers. Let's actually like create our own Facebook marketplaces. Like I remember in college, I was so broke and I couldn't afford anything that I would like post like looking from ride to LA to Berkeley, like please pick me up. And there'd be like ride share pages of like, I can give you a ride for like $40. And I'm like, great, I'll entertain you for like 6 hours and we can talk. So like, I think there's a lot of things that like sometimes we forget, like we don't need the latest technology products, or it's like, how do we be resourceful? Like, oh, like let's normalize picking up our friends from the airport. Let's like normalize like, giving a friend a ride to an event. So like I think when it comes to like internalizing how do you restructure your energy cost usage, let's think about it also like in a way that like public centers like libraries and cooling centers exist for Americans today. Like as much as we kind of like talk and criticize about our social service programs not being as well as they can, like we are very privileged to still have some of those resources even though they're not perfect and they have a lot of issues, that they can provide temporary things. That's what my mom would do during heat waves. She would take us to the library during the day so we wouldn't use energy at home. But at the same time, we had automatically cooling so that my mom wouldn't have to worry about her kids not being in danger of heat or heat related illnesses. So there's a lot of things I think that like I think growing up poor for myself made me more sustainable in the way I saw life than I am today, where I'm just kind of like, should I buy this latest technology? And it's like, if I was a working class American, I would think about what are ways that I can actually cool myself without having to use energy at home by other work or things like that.
That was perfect. I knew that. I knew you were going to come through with it. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you also made me think about like something that I said earlier is being people of color is really, connected to our ancestry. I think about like my family is from the South. My dad was born in rural Mississippi. His grandmother, she didn't have indoor plumbing. So she still had outhouse, so even though that's like clutches pearls, but a lot of that kind of pastoral type of living is very much so sustainable. And because over time Western culture is just immense in this country, sometimes we forget the very things that are the essence of our lineage, the essence of our culture from our ancestry. So thank you for lifting that up. Because I think about, man, literally where my dad grew grew up or was raised is completely different than the city. Like it's literally less than 30 minutes away. And these are also my family members that are still thriving and they're happy, and they might not consume as much as people do in metropolitan or urban environments. So thank you so much for lifting that up. So we are getting close to time, but before we transition, one for any of the attendees, please feel free to keep putting questions that you may have in the chat box. But in about an hour or so, we are going to hear the State of the Union. Oh my God, today. So what do you predict? I know I was seeing earlier today, and this is so interesting. So I was seeing earlier today that we should anticipate hearing President Trump talking about energy affordability, actually addressing, a lot of the discontent that is widespread across the nation with data centers, even though he came out hard in 2025, with his executive orders, with, this focus on, drill, baby drill, and all of these various things. So it's really interesting that we're seeing a bit of a shift, especially since we're in the midterms. So that's not lost on me. But just want to just chat around, what do you think you may hear tonight in the State of the Union? Even if you might not watch it, it might be a little bit difficult. But what do you think you'll start seeing in some of your social media feeds about tonight's State of the Union? And let's go with Kristy to start us off.
Like, what do I think I'm gonna see? I think it's gonna be kind of a mess. I don't even know if climate change is gonna even be mentioned, to be honest with you. Like, I feel like there's gonna be just so much like discussion to like really focus on probably targeting personalities, targeting people. It's going to be a lot of conversations on like pointing the finger away from the failures of this administration to probably other people or institutions. Um, but I don't picture climate even honestly fully coming up, honestly. So I'd be shocked if it did. I think if anything, they might reference like what's happening in New York right now and being like, yeah, climate change, global warming's not happening. Like I could see, some direction like that happening. But I would hope that like, there is maybe some talking points or points of like, yeah, like, like if there is discussion on job creation, like that could be an opportunity for those of us that understand the disparity to be like, well, actually like what is the percentage of that jobs being created and for what industry, and like what about that compared to the loss of all these jobs in all these other categories. um and the fact that like there's still people that have been unemployed for a year plus now, of being under this administration and stuff. So I mean, and beyond, I mean, like I think there's like gonna be a lot of talking points to say like, well, the previous administration set us up this way, so we don't need to do that. And I think there's going to be a lot of that, and also praising a lot of like obviously the positives and the wins. I think from like a bipartisan standpoint, I think there is tension on both sides around the affordability crisis. So I hope that there maybe is something in there that they address on how bad the cost of living is, but they probably will avoid that fact because that would require accountability for them to actually do something about it. But yeah, those are kind of some of my thoughts. But I think in general, I think it's important to maybe, even if some of us don't want to watch some of these things, it is good to get like those high level talking points so we can have commentary online, maybe dispel some of the myths, make sure that we're combating misinformation online is really important because, yeah, I think the more that we can have more environmental educators and advocates on these platforms, educating their communities about, what's true and what's not is really important, especially as we're going into a future election cycle coming up very soon.
Thank you. And let's go with Deanna. What do you foresee? And I'm gonna add one last thing as we wrap up. What's one of the things you foresee and with the State of the Union? And then how can we still resist and fight back, particularly as a young person?
Yes, so one thing I predict that will be said, it has nothing to do with climate change. It has something to do with democracy. Save America Act, and pushing our senators to, not our senators, our Michigan senators have been on it, but pushing the Republican senators to sign on to change the filibustering process so they can pass the Save America Act to disenfranchise voters around the country, even though it really affects their voting base more than it affects the other side. So that's one thing I predict that will be talked about. So democracy. And then also, like Kristy said, a lot of blaming the other side and blaming the previous administration for our high energy bills, even though it is proven studies out there showing when the spikes happened in 2025 and Trump was in office in 2025. And so that's those are two things I predict: Save America Act and just blaming other people and other entities for the affordability crisis we have in America. And as a young person, what we can do to resist, watch it. You need to watch, even though it's going to be a hard watch. I hate hearing him speak all the time. But you need to be informed to make better decisions going forward as we do approach the midterms. This is life or death for us. We have to live with this planet longer than a lot of the people that's in power have to. They're old. Okay, they're very old. And they don't have that much time on Earth. We do. So we need to protect it and make sure we're electing people that wants to protect it as well. So one thing I really want people in Michigan, if you never heard of it, look up Mop Up Michigan. It is called Money Out of Politics. And we're trying to get enough signatures so it could be a ballot initiative in November so we can get money out of politics. DTE and consumers are are monopolies here in the state of Michigan. And DTE just got a rate hike. It got approved. So more money is going to come out of people's paychecks that have to go to energy bills. So you need to look up Mop Up Michigan, sign the petition, send it to your friends, send it to your family, make sure they know about this petition so it can get on the ballot so we can get money out of politics. So the people in Lansing, they're not being bought by the utility companies that's making our bills go up. So the midterms, they affect us nationally, but they affect us locally. And I feel like that's more important what's going on the ground in our state. So you need to be informed what's going on in our state and locally. So if you're in Michigan, please look up Mop Up Michigan so we can fight back and resist these monopolies here driving our energy bills up. Thank you.
All right, we got our marching orders for Miss Deanna. So let's hear from Ernesto, and then we'll have the last word from Isaiah.
Yeah, to be honest, like a lot of people said tonight, I don't think we're going to hear too much about environmental issues, unfortunately. I think we're going to hear a lot about more so the DEI issues going on. I feel like that's something that's going to be addressed a lot, especially with everything kind of going on with the border right now. They just had giant shootout the other day, so that's probably something that even if he doesn't want to bring it out, I'm sure someone's going to pull it out somewhere or some way somehow it's going to get brought up. Probably the issues with New York going on. I mean, it's to the point that people are going around and making sculptures with the stuff on the ground at this point, just to say, "Hey, come clean this up," or we're just gonna, or we're not gonna help you guys either. So that's probably something that will get addressed. I mean, and just like a lot of people said, just the pointing of fingers probably a lot towards the previous administration saying, they left us with this. Now we're trying to fix it, and you're not going to see it for this long. I'm sure that's something that's going to get brought up a lot. It always does, but yeah, I don't think we're going to see too much of what we're looking to hear. But that doesn't mean you don't watch it. That doesn't mean you don't listen, because for all we know, we could be wrong.
Oh, thank you. He might surprise us. You never know, child.
Yeah, I don't have any predictions, but I do have an article I read this morning from Politico that basically said that Trump should be expected to announce that tech companies have pledged to kind of bear the costs of the energy prices. So that definitely will be something that, like, in terms of like maybe not, I guess it's climate because it's energy related, but like through an economic standpoint. So that is something that I am very interested in hearing because like we said earlier about like how are we going to put restrictions against these emerging new industries where there's a lack of infrastructure to hold them accountable. That is something where it's like, in one way it's interesting to hear that, but two, would that give them more power to continue building these centers even though there's the other issue with water and land use and other things. So I do think that like if even if you're not interested, paying attention to energy and healthcare, that is going to be a very major priority that it's going to really affect Americans today, especially the climate disasters is crisis is supposed to increase the amounts of chronic related illnesses globally. So I do think that's something where like health is going to be a very hopefully a key factor that they address in some way.
All right, well, there you have it. The State of the Union, is to be determined what we will hear tonight. But the biggest thing is that we have a powerful group of young people here tonight, but also across the country who are going to continue to stand on climate and environmental justice business, who are going to continue to push back on the attack on our pockets and our democracy. We ain't got maybe no money, but we do have power. We have people power, right? So, thank you so much to each of our co hosts and speakers for this evening. And thank you to our partners at Climate Action Campaign. And make sure that you follow everyone on social media. I know some of them will have some good commentary about whatever this orange man, using the words from Deanna, will talk about tonight. But thanks so much again and take care. Bye, y'all.